Welcome to another episode of Confidently Speaking with DOC. I am your host, David Doc Shirey, author of the book, Rare Confidence, Strategies and Inspiration to Strengthen Your Belief that you can achieve anything. Episode number 7, and we have got an incredible story and visual journey for you tonight. I'm super excited, but before we get to tonight's guest, I want to remind everybody, please, this is a participatory program. It works best when you are part of the show. So continue to comment and ask questions, and we will post as many of those and get to as many of them as humanly possible. Remember, you will notice from time to time I am looking elsewhere because I'm not just the host of the show. I am also the producer and engineer. And I'm also the guy that can fire the host if it comes to that. But we won't go there just yet. All right, tonight. Oh, also, if you would, please hit that share button. If you hit the share button, the reach of the show will get much bigger and we'll be able to continue to attract incredible guests. We have a great one tonight. And just prior to tonight's show, I secured a national and international guest for 2 weeks from tonight, but we will announce that at a later date. You know, our guest tonight is built just a little different than everybody else.
There are many different kinds of people in this world. There are spectators and there are participants. There are couch potatoes and there are difference makers. There are cowards and there are the most courageous amongst us. There are those who wish things were different and or better, and there are those who set out to make things different or better. Every once in a while, we meet someone so unique, so courageous, so giving, and so selfless that we can't help but stand up and take notice. People whose story is so extraordinary that most of us get exhausted even contemplating it. These are the people that live a life that most of us will only see on some documentary on television. Do people like this really even exist? What drives them? What makes them tick? Tonight, we are about to find out. Tonight's guest has been to 44 states and 55 countries. Her career as a photojournalist has taken her to more places than I can name, but here's a few. Kenya to Costa Rica, to South America, to Mexico, to Trinidad, to Argentina, to Ethiopia, to Sri Lanka, to Niger, to the eye of the Katrina storm in the United States, to Uganda, to Thailand, to Kenya, to Israel, to the West Bank, to Zimbabwe, to the United States' southern border with Mexico, all while visually documenting every step along the way, and she is just getting started. I am thrilled to introduce my guest tonight, Susie Shapira.
Hello, Susie.
Hi. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show tonight, Susie. You know, I have followed you online for a while, and I see all this amazing stuff that you do, and I'm just fascinated by your work, the places you've been, and just how generous you are with your person and trying to just do good in the world. And there's just not enough of that. And I'm just thrilled to have you on tonight. And I want you to know how much I appreciate you being here.
Well, that means so much to me. And thank you so much for having me. This is fantastic.
All right. So let's dig right into it, Susie. So when you and I first started talking about you appearing on the show, I asked you, what exactly are you? And you said, well, I'm an emergency and disaster photojournalist. Can you share with us what that is and how did you become one?
Of course. Well, I've been interested in photography since I was very young. I always had dreams and aspirations of becoming a photographer for National Geographic, like so many other young people. And then after I started traveling and taking photographs for fun, the more I saw, the more I wanted to do, and I realized international health was what piqued my interest the most. And within international health, I started a graduate program in international public health, and I've discovered complex emergencies. And a complex emergency is anything from a war to a natural disaster to the coronavirus. This is definitely a complex emergency, especially as it pertains to international health. So I realized though that wasn't the best avenue for me. So I've changed directions in journalism, and then almost randomly out of journalism school, I got my first job as a photographer, and then I just ran with it.
And the rest, as they say, is history. Now, I know, Susie, listen, I wrote a book about confidence. So I'm a big fan of confident people. When I see the places that you've gone and the things that you've done, not only does it take a high degree of confidence, but I imagine it takes a high degree of guts, right? I mean, let's break it down to what it really is. You got to have guts, because most of these places you're going by yourself. Where do those guts come from?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, my grandmother called it chutzpah, right? So
Mine too.
I have chutzpah to spare. I grew up in a family of lots of go-getters, and I was always, I have two brothers. You sort of had to, it was survival of the fittest. And I don't know. I think I'm very fortunate to say that I've been someone who has charged towards the things that scare me, as opposed to shying away from them under most circumstances.
So you originally wanted to be a human rights attorney, if I have the story correct.
I did. I wanted to defend people who had been discriminated against for having HIV.
All right. Now, you've shared with me that your grandmother, Frida, and your Aunt Karen were amazing philanthropists.
Amazing. Yes.
What was their influence on you and your life today?
Well, my grandmother, Frida, was extraordinary. I mean, they were both just extraordinary women. And they both sort of, in spite of being a woman at different times, found ways to be incredibly impactful. And my grandmother, Frida, I mean, she was like a legendary Pittsburgh philanthropist with her work with the Pittsburgh Foundation, and she did amazing things in the African American community in Pittsburgh long before, most other people were doing that. And then Karen was very active in the Jewish community. So she was, I believe, president of the UJF, and in addition to my dad and my uncle and my grandfather, and so and she though really fell in love with Israel, and I think that was her passion, and she was part of the Ethiopian airlift, and she worked a lot with bringing foreign nationals to Israel, so that spoke a lot to me.
Well, you can certainly tell the influence that they've had on you. All right. Now, you've done so much. You've been so many places, and your work is incredible. What I want to do during tonight's show is I want to kind of like chunkify it and highlight different countries or maybe different projects, and just take a look at a couple of your best shots that you've shared with me from those, and we can talk about what transpired, what's going on there, and we'll just kind of take it from there. And I think let's start with Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe is a landlocked country in South Central Africa. It's slightly smaller than California and is bordered by Botswana on the west, Zambia on the north, Mozambique on the east, and South Africa on the south.
Now, Susie, you spent most of out of all the things you've done in your career, I think it's safe to say you spent the majority of one chunk of time in Zimbabwe, right?
On the border, on the South African side of the border in Zimbabwe, yes.
Okay. What brought you there?
I had met a Zimbabwean journalist when I was in graduate school. His name was Ray Chodo, and he had been imprisoned by the Mugabe regime and had such a unbelievable experience. He had actually been granted asylum here in the United States, and we became fast friends. And he explained to me a lot more about what was going on in Zimbabwe under the dictatorship of Robert Mugabe than I ever knew. And I was in Kenya working on another job, and things went terribly wrong in Zimbabwe with an election, and there was a lot of fallout, and Zimbabweans were fleeing the country by the tens of thousands. And I happened to have made some great friends in South Africa on a traveling extravaganza when I was in Zanzibar, and I called them up and I said, I'm coming. I want to check out this story. And they said, we can't wait to have you. And so they offered me, the perfect springboard from which to dig a little deeper into this situation. And I ended up on the border because I wanted to know what was happening with kids. Were kids coming across? Were they unaccompanied minors? What was happening to them? Where were they going? That was the motivation behind it.
And I notice in a lot of your work, kids are a big focus. And let's start to show some of these incredible shots. So the first one is, this is Lazarus and Jack. I believe this shot is from 2009. And these are two well-dressed young men. And you shared with me that Zimbabwe has a huge focus on education, but because of the unrest there, it's really hard to access.
Yes. So they're actually in their school uniforms. That was taken at school. And these two had fled Zimbabwe, not knowing each other before. They were from totally different areas of the country, and both were, really determined to pursue their education in South Africa, where it's free.
So what you were telling me was, so in Zimbabwe, even though they have a high value on education, unless you can afford it, you're not getting an education.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. Now, some of the stories, and I know you and I talked a little bit, and you send me a lot of information, and I wish we had hours to talk about it. This shot of Brian, you told me that Brian is 9 and he is an unaccompanied minor. And I can try to figure it out as somebody who is semi-intelligent, but can you share with us what an unaccompanied minor really means?
Yes. Actually, all of the kids were unaccompanied minors. So was Jack and Lazarus as well. But Brian was really young. He was, I think, 8 years old. He lied about his age, though. He is, to this day, one of the craftiest, scrappiest young men I have ever met in my life. An unaccompanied minor is a child who crosses an international border without a parent or guardian.
Wow. That's that. And so really they're just at the mercy of the community to kind of take care of them?
Yes. Well, and fortunately at this time there were Save the Children and UNICEF and the International Organization for Migration, which is a UN organization. They were all there. So the police would arrest the kids and they would dump them at the showground, which was where all the people who were seeking asylum were being processed. And then they would call Save the Children or Care International, and they would take the kids into a shelter that they had set up.
All right, let's talk about Ashley. Now, unfortunately, when you're going to document things that are happening around the world, not every story has a great happy ending. You shared with me that you tried to help Ashley, but he eventually wound up on the street. What happened with Ashley?
Actually, it's very sad. It was very sad, very difficult for me. He was also extremely young, and he was one of the first kids that I met. And after he didn't like, it was very difficult at the shelter in Messina. Messina is the town on the South African side of the border. And the kids would, the older kids would get bullied. They'd get beaten up. Their stuff would get stolen. And he was small and young. And so he fell victim to it quite a bit, though he and Brian were best friends. And Ashley wanted to go to a different town where he thought he would be better off. And he was. And so he did. He went to a different town, and I continued to support him there. But again, he said, oh, they're too strict and the rules are too many, and I just want this and I want that. And unfortunately, in spite of my best efforts, he ended up back in Messina and on the streets, and unfortunately involved in some drugs. But we did get a chance to speak for the first time in several years this year. And that it was just nice. It was nice to reconnect with him.
Now, you're a very humble person, Susie, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but you told me privately that you made a promise to some of these kids that if they finished their education, that you would do something for them. Can you share with us what that was?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, knowing it's very, very challenging to accomplish an education under these very difficult circumstances. I told the kids that if they completed high school, which is free, so education in South Africa is free through high school, that if they finished high school, I would help them with college.
And how many kids have you helped with college?
One so far.
Okay. All right. Let's move on now to Kenya.
Kenya lies across the equator in East Central Africa on the coast of the Indian Ocean. Twice the size of Nevada, Kenya borders Somalia to the east, Ethiopia to the north, Tanzania to the south, Uganda to the west, and Sudan to the northwest.
Now, you shared with me, Susie, that an IDP camp stands for internally displaced persons. And this is a pic of an IDP camp in Kenya. What is it that they are displaced from?
So in Kenya, it was just after Christmas, 2007, they held an election, which the incumbent party was victorious, much to the chagrin and subsequent bad behavior of the losing party. But there was a lot of internal ethnic strife at that time in Kenya between the two sort of major ethnic groups. And the winning party in Western Kenya, where the losing party was the majority, unfortunately were driven from their homes in the middle of the night in a crazy riot type situation where someone who earlier that day had been their neighbor suddenly was chasing them with, weapons and machetes and burning their houses down and burning their businesses down. And so they all had to run for their lives, basically. So fortunately, many of them were able to find refuge, but had suffered total and utter devastating loss. I mean, their homes were gone. They couldn't go back. They didn't feel safe. And so an IDP camp in that circumstance is built so that people who have lost their homes can have somewhere to be safe.
Now, you told me that this church rescued these kids from near certain death. What was going to happen?
Well, so that same thing, it was that same night, or there was like a few nights, and it was all of their families. So their families ran from their homes to a church where the presiding minister offered them sanctuary. And fortunately, the rest of the Kenyans at that point, though they were furious about the circumstances, respected the sanctity of the church and did not attack anybody. They stopped there at the border. or the, the boundary of the
Right.
tree.
Right. Now, a couple pictures are really just like self-explanatory. I mean, I look at this woman and her face just tells a story. And as you remarked when you sent me this picture, you had it marked just cutie in an IDP camp. And that picture pretty much speaks for itself because he sure is a cutie. There's another picture I wanted to ask you about before we leave Kenya. And actually, there's two other pictures in Kenya. One of them is this picture of these women that were waiting on food from USA Aid. What is that process like?
So the United States, up until much more recently, has been the #1 provider of supplementary food and nutrition all over the world. And so this was back in 2004. And this was actually, I think that this was Ethiopia, and these women had come from their homes, so they walk a long distance to get soya meal and rice and like sugar and the essentials basically that are provided by the United States. It's the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and they do tremendous work all over the world, really assisting communities that otherwise can't assist themselves.
We have a question for you from our audience, Susie, and Mindy Goldenberg wants to know, who do you normally travel with, and do you have UN protection?
No. No, I travel by myself most of the time. When I was, younger, getting started, when I like the first few times I went, I would travel with organizations. I never traveled with anybody, but I had somebody to meet there. Like I would meet up with someone, but it was up to me to find my hotel and find my way from the airport and then.
So you'd have like a local to kind of give you the lay of the land a little bit.
Yeah, and then I would work with international organizations. So I would make contacts before I went, tell them that I was coming, and then I would call them and say, "Hey, look, I'm here. Can I come and see, your IDP camp?" Or I'm taking, I'm documenting the situation. But that was what gave me great access. Like that's what gave me the best access to the scenarios. But I've never had protection. But I make friends really easily. So
I can tell. All right,
yeah.
I want to ask you about Josephine because you shared with me that this is one of your most well-known pictures. Tell us about Josephine in this picture.
When I was studying abroad in Kenya in 1996. And we just went to visit a family where the father, his main source of income was that he made these really extraordinary ovens, and they were made out of clay, and he did a whole demonstration of how he made them and everything. But I was totally taken with Josephine, who was shelling peas with her mother when I met her. And there was obviously a huge language barrier, but I was just very attracted to her. And I was able to snap that picture, which is one of my personal favorites and which is on my business card. And
what a great shot. All right. We have a question for you from Lori Ball-Moretsky. She wants to know if you're going to write a book about your travels and include your photographs.
Yes, I would love to. Actually, I a few years ago, I went to a workshop in New York where you got to do a pitch for a book, and mine was about my travels and my experiences. And I had two out of three of the agents, the literary agents that I presented to, were interested in the book. So yes, absolutely, that is part of the plan.
All right, let's make a move now to Niger.
Niger is a landlocked Western African country about twice the size of Texas, bounded on the northwest by Algeria, on the northeast by Libya, on the east by Chad, on the south by Nigeria and Benin.
Now, I know, Susie, that I totally mispronounced the name of that country, so why don't you correct me and share with the world the proper way to pronounce that place?
It's Niger.
Niger. And that's of French descent?
Yes. Well, the French colonized Niger.
Okay. All right. So a couple of the pictures from there really tugged at my heartstrings. And in this picture, you have come across an emaciated baby. And I don't know, is that a boy or a girl? Do you remember?
No, it was a little girl.
It was a little girl, and she was reaching out to you. If you could see here, she's reaching out to you, and then in the next shot, you held her. And I just wanted to ask you, what were you feeling at that moment that you're holding this little girl who was reaching out to you?
That was easily one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had in my life. And I was so afraid. She was so fragile, but she so amazingly came to life when I came over to her, and I was balancing on my legs with my legs up, and just it was unbelievable. It was one of the most unbelievable moments of my entire life.
That's a beautiful picture. It really is. It really is. And I can tell even now, you talking about it, it still tugs at your heartstrings a little bit. All right. Now, this beautiful young lady is selling food to women in line to have their malnourished children treated by doctors. And I just thought that there was a lot going on here. She looks like an entrepreneur to me, number one, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
And so tell me about this shot.
Another just extraordinarily beautiful young woman, and in Niger they mark their faces as a means of beauty, and so the line was incredibly long for these women to see the doctors. It was Doctors Without Borders that was running a mobile clinic. And the moms had walked for miles to bring their babies to be evaluated and to receive, supplementary food. And the interesting part, right, she was selling food. The challenge in Niger was, though the mothers were able to eat, their sustenance, what they were eating, wasn't complete enough to nourish their kids beyond the point of malnutrition. So they were missing protein and calcium and all sorts of essential vitamins and minerals that qualified them as being malnourished.
All right, we have a question from Vince Sacca, who wants to know, Susie, have you ever found yourself in any dangerous situations? Have you had any equipment taken because of the photos you were taking?
No, I've never had. Yes, I've been in dangerous situations. No, I've never had my equipment taken. I am very careful. I don't ever bring out my camera unless I know that I can take photographs, and I try very hard to get permission before I do. I think the most important thing to me in all of the work that I do is that I have a great connection with people, and that's what makes photographs great, in my personal opinion, that people trust me, and so they show me a side of themselves that then makes it easy to take a nice picture of them. But I am for someone as petite as I am, I can be very scary. So I have definitely taken the offensive, I think, in most circumstances where I found myself in dangerous situations. I make myself scary so that I can get out of there.
Back to that guts thing. All right, let's move on to Uganda.
Uganda is twice the size of Pennsylvania and is in East Africa, and it's bordered on the west by Congo, on the north by the Sudan, on the east by Kenya, and on the south by Tanzania and Rwanda.
Now, the pictures from Uganda that really struck something with me was the one with the mom who was sick with HIV, and yet she still had this humongous smile on her face in this shot. What do you remember about this lady?
Oh, she was so lovely. it was so sad. She was a single mom and she had 3 kids and she was really sick. And at that time, in that particular area of Uganda, HIV was a real stigma. I can't remember. I think it was International Rescue Committee who I was working with, or CARE, and they were really trying to educate people that, you know, just because someone has HIV doesn't mean that they are a pariah, and that it's important to help them and support them in whatever way that you can.
Now, is this her daughter?
That is her daughter. No, is it the same clothes? I don't know if we can go back to the.
Sure.
Yes. Okay. So that is her daughter, and then there were 2 other kids, and so
These guys?
yes, and they, you know, it was just very humble little house, pretty nice actually. I mean, for very solid, and it was really, Uganda was really special. It was kind of random that I ended up there, and it ended up being just a really special place.
All right, let's go to a different continent now, in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka is an island in the Indian Ocean off the southwest tip of India. Sri Lanka is about half the size of Alabama. Most of the land is flat and rolling. Mountains in the south region rise to over 8,000 feet.
And when I look at some of your shots from Sri Lanka, one of the ones that I really took notice of was this shot. And if I'm not mistaken here, there had been a tsunami there that washed everything away. And then this family had a fishing boat, and I think they named it Tsunamis Never Come.
Yes. Yes, you can see in the background of that picture that there's a new house being built there, and there's a wood shack next to it. That particular part of Sri Lanka is very close to the beach. So the beach was just sort of right over there. And I know there were lots of very famous photographs and stories about the train that had been swept off of its tracks by the tsunami, and that was right in this particular village. So yes, and this little girl was from farther south. So this is all along the southwest coast of Sri Lanka, which I have to say, Sri Lanka is one of my favorite places in the entire world. I went back 3 times. I have my own Sri Lankan family. I could not, it was one of the most amazing places, with some of the best food and the most gorgeous beaches that you've ever seen, and such an extraordinary history, and the resilience of this country, and the tsunami amazingly brought the country together, which, you know, historically has seen an enormous amount of internal turmoil, and we were able to really go all over the country, where I think, had I been there at a different time, and when I returned at a different time, I was not able to return to other areas in the north.
All right, I don't have a map of this one, but I want to show one picture of you photographed a family in the West Bank in Jericho, a Palestinian family. And I want you to just maybe, Susie, give us a quick overview as to how you got there. What was your take on what was happening in the West Bank and this family?
Well, this was really cool. I was in Israel doing a different project, and I had more time. And so I contacted Oxfam, Oxfam UK, and said, hey, I'm here. I'm at your disposal. I would love to love to document some of your programs. And the name of the town is actually Farah, or I think it's Farah or Farah. I might not be saying it right, but it's near Jericho. And to get there, we drove a long way, and we drove through Ramallah. So I got to see the wall. I actually forgot to send you that picture. So the wall in Ramallah, and then through, I think it was 2 or 3 checkpoints. So we were pretty deep in the West Bank. And this family, it was really cool. So Oxfam was helping these families in the middle of the desert build greenhouses so that they could grow fresh vegetables and feed their families. And it was a very successful program. And they were the loveliest family, just lovely people. And there were so many kids. Like, I don't even actually remember how many kids there were. There were a lot of kids. Like one family, 10 kids, I think. And on the way back, I will say this. So I am come from a Jewish family, and my family is Jewish. And I did not think that that would matter. And so I didn't tell anyone, because why would I? I don't know. I didn't really think it was something necessary. But on our way back, we stopped at a falafel stand inside the West Bank, and everybody knew that I was Jewish. All of the Palestinians, they immediately knew, not the people that I was working with, but the everyone that was there in the village. They were like circling and you know, I've never in my life ever played up the fact that I'm an American. Yeah. So when I'm traveling, I try as hard as I can to pretend I'm not an American, because sometimes it's safer. Right. And I was, with the accent and everything, trying to talk as loud as I could, just to make sure that people understood that I was not, you know, that I was not there in bad, you know.
Sure. You know, I am intrigued by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I've studied it to a degree. And actually, since I just showed that picture, I will announce 2 weeks from tonight, I'm having on Jonathan Tobin, who's a world-renowned journalist, and he knows about as much on this subject as almost any man in America. So I'm thrilled to have him on in 2 weeks to talk about that. All right, I have another question for you. Do you ever speak to students about your travels and your pictures?
You know, not yet. I would love to. I would love to. My one of my favorite experiences in South Africa was that I was there to shoot a high school class for some of my kids who have been documenting. They were there in class, and it was a geography class, I think, and the teacher never came. So I got up and taught a class. I mean, I said, well, you know, what questions do you have for me? And they had a million questions.
Yeah, right.
And so that was super fun. And they loved it, and I loved it, and it was really wonderful.
Well, maybe after this interview airs, you will get flooded with requests to come and teach a class. So, all right. Now, I know you've done some work with FEMA. You've also photographed some emergencies and disasters on your own. I want to show a couple of these shots, and then I want to get to the meat and potatoes here, and that's your border documentary. There's a picture here of a flood in Iowa. And when I see this picture, it's incredibly sad and tragic, but yet the picture is amazing. How did you even get this shot?
Well, thank you. I love that picture. My job was to document. FEMA used to have, and I'm not really sure anymore how much they do still have, professional photographers who would document the emergencies. And I ended up, it's very, 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 very challenging and a very long process to get a job with FEMA. But I ended up getting the job, and I was there. That's Oakville, Iowa, which is in the southeastern corner of the state and very close to the Mississippi River. And the terrible Iowa floods of, I'm pretty sure it was 2008. It might have been 2009, but it just absolutely ripped through, all of central and southeastern Iowa. And this particular town was just completely inundated.
Now, Susie, what I know about photography, you could literally fit on my little pinky fingernail. But one of the things I do know is when you're able to, it's these kind of shots that just stick out at you when there's beauty and horribleness all in the same picture. And I think you've captured that here, where you've got a sunflower blooming in the wake of Hurricane Katrina in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. I thought this was a great shot.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a favorite. A lot of people really love that one. It was really quite something.
And this picture here is of the 9th Ward in New Orleans after Katrina, when a young lady kind of sees her reflection in her house, which has been devastated. You really kind of have to look to find what you're looking for here, but once you see it, it's a pretty powerful image. What do you remember about this shot?
Oh, this family was so wonderful. They were just wonderful, Betty and Stuart. I just actually came across their information the other day, that you can see their couch is like kind of sitting up on something, and if you look into the reflection, you can see the water line all the way above the window. So these guys had been flooded up right onto their roof, and they were, the ones who decided to ride up the storm. And what an incredible account they gave of, there were lots of conspiracy theories in after Katrina about the levee breaking. And, it's very suspicious. It's very hard to say exactly what happened, but their house didn't flood until a few days after the storm, after the levee had broken. And the lower 9th Ward is an all African-American neighborhood, very poor, one of the oldest in New Orleans. And so, but what a spirit they had. I mean, such a beautiful family, and they were so wonderful to me, and they invited me into their home. I had to wear a mask. I could barely breathe. The mold was so bad in there that I couldn't even be in there for more than a couple of seconds, because it was intense.
All right. I want to move on now to your most recent project, the Border documentary. And before we talk about it, I want to show this quick preview that you have posted on your social media. Susie, what is your impetus for this project?
I was mad.
What were you mad at?
I was mad that during the shutdown, I was mad that 800,000 Americans were put out of work, either on furlough or being forced to work without pay, for something that I just didn't think justified putting 800,000 Americans out of work. And I thought, geez, I've spent 10 years on a much more challenging border. Why not just go and see for myself what's happening?
And that's what you did. Before you journeyed out many days, you would post a short video about where you were going that day. I want to take a look here at one of your earlier videos with, I believe, your best friend.
Hi everyone, it's Susie. I'm here with Stella. Let's see if we can get her. There she is. My road trip companion. She and I are in Phoenix right now, and we are heading to El Paso tonight, and then later Laredo and Brownsville. And we are going to be driving the length of the U.S. border with Mexico, sharing videos and photographs and interviews, hopefully with people who live along the border, to shine a light on the current situation.
Now, I imagine having Stella with you was a big help.
Oh, she was the best. It was awesome.
Now, as I begin to dig through a ton of your images from there, so many different thoughts came to mind. One of them was there was clear like politics and patriotism, and here we see clearly there's some sort of border fence that's barbed, actually a double fence. You've got barbed wire, and then you have some other fencing. Certainly doesn't look like anything Trump did any time recently. And then I notice here we have now, is this a border patrol agent, or is this a United States military, or is that one of the same?
He's in the Army. Actually, the previous shot, the existing fence, the really rusted out corrugated metal, that's been there a really long time. But all of the barbed wire was installed by the Army. So okay. The guy in the gentleman in the next photograph he was stationed out of, I can't remember if it was like Arkansas or St. Louis, but he and his battalion were hanging barbed wire on top of that fence, and that's in Nogales, Arizona. And they covered the whole, they covered, there is now barbed wire hanging or, around the fence pretty much all up and down the length of the border. It gets cut. They just cut it. I mean, they put it up, they cut it. So.
Now you told me that you basically shot all of this on your iPhone. You would interview people. I want to show a quick clip of this one gentleman that you interviewed to give everybody a taste of kind of your little mini interviews that you did.
People don't realize that the border actually runs in the middle of the river. So if somebody gets across to dry land on this side, on the levee of the river, they're in the United States, even though the fence is further inland. And they're eligible to claim asylum the minute their foot hits the ground, by law, international law as well as U.S. law. So as far as keeping people who are trying to migrate because of one condition or another from doing so, that's what primarily what this fence does.
Now, who was that gentleman?
That was a fabulous man. He was actually the only person that I had been connected with by a friend from Pittsburgh. So he was the uncle of my friend's wife, and he was born and raised in El Paso and incredibly knowledgeable about everything, and had lived through everything, and had such a tremendous knowledge of, interestingly, the Jewish community in El Paso, which is much, much bigger than you would think that it was. And the days when Pancho Villa used to come and shut down the local department store so that he could go shopping, which was like in the 1800s. So right. He was a fountain of knowledge and history, and he was really wonderful. He gave me a fantastic tour. So the project almost had a life of its own. As soon as I decided to do it, I would be connected with these tremendous people who would take me, everywhere and show me their lives and tell me their stories.
All right, we have about 10 minutes left, Susie, and there's a few more things I want to get to here. So unfortunately, this next question, which I'm sure you could take 15 minutes to answer, let's get a real quick, succinct answer. But as you were traveling the length of the border, you got a sense as to what this crisis was, and whether what we were hearing from Washington and what you were seeing on the border, whether they jived with one another. Can you share with us a little bit about what your sense was from the people that you came across on the U.S. side of the border?
Well, I don't want to give it away, but I will say that what I found and the stories that were shared with me did not really jive with what the narrative was that was coming out of Washington. And the only reason that I'm saying that now is that it was uniform. I've now interviewed so many people, I can't even count anymore. And there were probably 5 who didn't agree out of the 70 people, let's say. Everyone had their own good points, though. So I think what I want to say the most about the experience at the border is having the opportunity to listen to so many people who live there and who it's their life and it's their family's lives and it's their grandparents' lives. You learn how to see things in a different way. And I think that's what will come across, hopefully, in the project.
Fair enough. Let's leave a little bit for the project to come out. Okay, so this, if I understand correctly, is the Tijuana side. And here's a mural that depicts graffiti about deported veterans. Now, are these U.S. veterans that have been deported?
Yes. So this is a highly controversial mural. If you'll notice, the U.S. flag is painted. So it's from standing at the top. When you look down, you see all the names, and when you're standing at the bottom and you look up, you see it says justice and lies. And then the flag depicted upside down is actually the military's distress signal. So I think the U.S. military is pretty mad about this. And even that day when I went and took the picture and posted it on Instagram, there was all sorts of suspicious things that all of a sudden happened, started happening on my account and everything. So yes, what happens is, unfortunately, and it sort of depends on the administration, but they are Mexican of nationals of birth, right? Who made their way to the United States one way or the other, and enlisted in the military, and almost uniformly were arrested for some kind of something, right? So a misdemeanor drug possession or something like that. Could be anything. It could be a traffic infraction. And then they were deported. And so people were pretty bad about it.
I know. Here's another shot on the Tijuana side. Now, is that a flood or is that a body of water there?
Oh, that's the beach.
That's the beach. Okay. Oh, so the fence is right through the middle of the beach?
Yes. There's I thought I sent you that picture. I'm sorry if I didn't. The fence in San Diego and Tijuana goes right into the water. And on the Tijuana side, you can go right up to the fence. Like nobody cares. And that's why there's so much art. In fact, if you get a chance to go and visit, it is magnificently beautiful. It's a park. So on the Tijuana side, it's a park. On the US side, it's like a demilitarized zone. You cannot approach the fence. Border Patrol is sitting right there. However, on the Mexico side, then there's like cafes and seafood restaurants, and it's like a whole fiesta. And on the US side, there's actually a protected wetland and park. And yes, so every Saturday and Sunday, Border Patrol, CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, they open, in San Diego, there's actually 3 fences, but they open the section between the primary fence and the secondary fence, and they allow people to go in the little park area and see their friends or loved ones, no questions asked. And every Sunday there is a religious service where both sides come together and hold a cooperative ceremony in the name of peace and brotherhood. And it's every Sunday too, which is really extraordinary.
So the Border Patrol agents, this is on the beach in San Diego. I mean, is this something you see everywhere, or is it just sporadic?
Oh no, Border Patrol is everywhere. I mean, at the border, Border Patrol is everywhere at the border. They have trucks, they have ATVs, they have horses, they have helicopters. It's amazing. The Border Patrol presence is extraordinary, and that's something that I do think is important to mention. People who live at the border, except under certain circumstances in certain places, our Border Patrol are like members of their community, right? So they're their nephews or their uncles or their brother-in-laws, and they help people feel safe. The work of the Border Patrol is extraordinarily important, and I think one of the most important elements of the project is better understanding the role of Border Patrol and the accurate conception of some of the bad stuff that goes on, and then the gross misconception of the majority of the job.
All right, I want to show a quick clip here, and then I have a question for you about it. So it looks like you're driving up to the fence, and there's a big gap in the fence, and you decide to make a right there. But could you have continued to go straight and come back and forth if you wanted?
I did. So actually this was the first time I'd really seen, this was in Brownsville. And so this was the first time I'd seen the fence. In Brownsville town, it's right there and you can walk right up to it. So in different areas of the country, the fence is treated in totally different ways. Where it's closer to the river, it's much more relaxed. And then there is no fence where the river is the natural border. But yeah, so I thought, what the hell? There's a big field and there's a fence. Let me go check it out. Right. So I went and then it was sort of like a frontage road. But when I did go through, there's a levee. And then like my friend in El Paso said, the border wasn't right there. So, you kind of go up onto the levee and then it just offers you a really good view all around of if anyone is coming and then the Border Patrol guy, at this point I hadn't had any interaction with the Border Patrol officer. And so I was terrified. I mean, I was terrified of Border Patrol until I actually met them. And yeah, so he came up to like kind of see what I was doing. And I was like, oh my God, Border Patrol.
Really amazing stuff. Susie, hang on with me 1 second while I plug what I got going on Thursday. Mm-hmm. Thursday night, we have Dr. Danny Pompa on. Dr. Pompa is a health and wellness expert. And, so many people put on a couple extra pounds during the lockdown, and Dr. Pompa is going to share with us how to get it off. He is a intermittent fasting expert. He's got a unique take on intermittent fasting. We're going to talk about herd immunity and his ideas on getting on the other side of this virus, inflammation, and so much more. Can't wait for that. Susie, what are you going to do for an encore?
What do you mean?
Like after the border project, after traveling to 7,000 countries, what's next for Susie Shapira?
I'm sure that it will be determined once the border project has launched. I'm sure it has a life of its own, right? We'll see. It always comes. Something always comes.
Susie, you have been an amazing guest, and I can't tell you how thankful that I am and our viewers are that you just took us on this amazing journey. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're awesome. Hang on for 1 minute, please. All right. Listen, I told you there are no subjects that we are going to avoid on this show. I am scouring the earth for some of the most amazing, interesting human beings that I can find, and I want to bring those to you in a variety of perspectives. You guys are awesome. We're going to do this again on Thursday. Please be there, 7 o'clock sharp. See you soon.